Since I raised my entry into the shower, it is time to patch it up with the drywall. I decided to reuse the existing drywall that I originally took off since it was already textured. I made my measurement and drew a straight line. Then I used the utility knife and made many passes to make my cut. This was the easiest way for me to make a nice clean cut. But by any means, I'm not a drywall expert, so I'm learning as I go and sharing my experience with you guys. I then began to clean up one of the messier edges with my utility knife by going over it a couple times. And now it's ready to be installed. I used some drywall screws to hold it in place and spaced them out roughly 10 to 12 inches. I then took some more measurements of the top part of the shower entry and drew it up on another piece of drywall. Again, I used my utility knife and I made the small cuts first. Then I had to make multiple passes along the side of the drywall. After that, I used a knife to clean up the edges so it has a nice fit. After that, I screwed it into place. I also had to screw in this small piece over here. To finish off the corner, I used this metal corner piece and screw it in place. I bought this all-purpose joint compound, some drywall tape, this big 10-inch taping knife, and this drywall compound holder. Not sure what the official name for it is. I used a small putty knife to get started and placed some of the compound onto the bigger knife like this. Then I started patching up all the tear marks that I had from when I removed the big mirror. Next, I went through the drywall and patched up all the seams without the tape first. I'm not sure if this is the proper way to do it, but I'm sure the keyboard warriors will let me know in the comments below how to properly do it. But to me, it made sense to do a rough patch first without the tape and then do another layer with the tape. But feel free to correct me in the comments. Once the first run was dry, I applied more compound and made sure it was plenty and started to apply the tape. As you can see, I kept switching between the big taping knife and the putty knife, trying to get a nice even spread on the seam and the surfaces around the tape. When applying the tape, make sure you apply the side that has a bend into the wall like this. I continued to apply more compound onto the corners and over the tape that I just applied to ensure I had a nice and even surface near the edges. I went to the other side and did the same thing. I applied lots of compound to the seam and then applied the tape. Then you typically want to apply a nice thin layer of compound over the top of the tape, but be careful as the tape can shift a little. I then applied a long piece of tape down the edge where the schluter is. Because I had a really big gap and that wall was uneven, it required a lot of leveling with the compound and I didn't want it to crack, so that's why I put the tape there first. So I applied a lot of compound over it and then used a 10-inch knife to make sure that I had a nice straight wall. It wasn't too bad to do this, but I just had to make sure I had enough compound on my knife. I basically did this going all the way down to the bottom. Finally, I applied some tape to the ceiling seam and again used lots of compound to level off the new ceiling with the existing ceiling. After it was all dry, it was time to sand everything down. Sanding ensures that you have removed all the imperfections or bubbles out of the wall and makes sure that the wall is very even. You typically want to do this before doing the wall texture. I recommend you sand every area that you patched up, regardless of how annoying this process is. Next, I used a paintbrush and removed the sand dust from the wall. I felt like this helped to remove the dust from the wall before I started to paint. Next, I bought a sponge like this and this clear plexiglass putty knife. I'll have the links in the description below and the proper names for these tools. This is strictly to do the knockdown style texture that I have. I used a plate, placed some compound in it, and splashed very little water to make it a little bit more gooey and mixed it really well. Then I took the sponge and dipped it into the compound and started leaving random marks on the wall. For the very first time, I recommend you try doing this on a piece of cardboard or somewhere where you can practice and get a feel for it. Do this on all the areas that you're trying to patch up. Here's what mine ended up looking like after it was all said and done with all the areas. Before proceeding to the next step, you want to wait a few minutes for it to dry a little bit. Just don't wait too long. But again, this is where a practice run helps to know how to gauge how long you should wait. Next, take a clear plastic knife and the big 10-inch knife that you will use to clean the plastic knife, and take the plastic knife and gently apply it to the wall with a very light feather pressure. As you move it down, you will instantly start seeing the knockdown-like texture appearing on your wall. Use the big knife and clean the plastic knife after each pass that you do. Keep repeating this process until all areas are complete. This is what mine ended up looking like. Honestly, I was very pleased how well this worked out, considering this was my very first time doing it this way. It wasn't a perfect match to my existing knockdown, but it was very close where it looked pretty good. Next, I used a small putty knife and started to clean up the schluter. Once I got the majority off, I used a wet yellow sponge and that seemed to work really well. Next, I opened up the paint, gave it a nice good mix, and began to paint over my creation. Once the paint is applied, it really started to blend in really well with the old texture. Let me know what you think of my first attempt of doing the drywall, and don't be afraid to try something new for the first time yourself. Check out how I demoed the shower next.